I was halfway through presenting our new client onboarding flow, something I had rebuilt from duct tape, late-night coding sessions, and pure professional perseverance into a multi-million-dollar quarterly revenue machine when the heavy mahogany door slammed open like a scene from an action movie. Victoria Thorne strutted into the conference room wearing her signature 6-inch designer heels and blood-red lipstick, holding a silver HR clipboard like it was a holy relic handed down directly from corporate gods. She walked in as though she owned every single breath of oxygen in the building, adjusted her tailored blazer, looked straight at me with supreme disdain, and sneered, "Per HR compliance authority, your role has been dissolved effective immediately. You are fired." You could literally feel the atmospheric pressure in the room plunge as if a balloon had been punctured in slow motion. The investor delegation, 6 high-powered senior partners from Crestview Capital who had spent the last 3 hours reviewing our financial metrics before wiring $50 million into Vance Global Tech, completely froze in place. Their lead managing partner, Diane Prescott, adjusted her designer glasses, her expression turning into stone. Her junior associate Penn stopped mid-scribble on his leather notebook. Even the executive assistant stationed near the door paused with her iced coffee cup halfway to her mouth, staring with wide eyes as if she could not register the sheer audacity of what had just transpired. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not even lower the digital laser pointer in my right hand. I simply leaned back against the polished walnut presentation podium, looked Victoria straight in the eye, and let out a calm, measured smile. "Weird," I said loud enough to ensure every single person in the 40-foot conference hall heard each syllable clearly. "My mom is at home." The statement hung in the air for 3 agonizing seconds, creating a suffocating silence where utter confusion danced with disbelief. Victoria's sneer flickered for a fraction of a second. She opened her red-painted lips to deliver what was undoubtedly intended to be a devastating follow-up insult. But before a single sound could escape her throat, the frosted glass double doors at the rear of the executive suite swung open. In walked CEO Charles Vance. He was 76 years old, the founding visionary and primary shareholder of Vance Global Tech, wearing a bespoke navy wool suit with silver hair and a quiet, commanding presence so heavy that people in his company automatically stood up straighter just to survive his gaze. He moved with the unhurried grace of a man who had built empires from 3-room offices and knew exactly where every single brick in the building was laid. Charles walked directly past Victoria, who was still standing mid-stride with her silver clipboard raised like a battle flag. He did not glance at her. Instead, he walked straight up to my podium and placed a heavy, reassuring hand firmly on my shoulder. "Apologies to everyone present," my father said, his low baritone voice cutting through the room with effortless weight. "Family matter." Victoria's face underwent a rapid transformation that I can only describe as complete structural collapse. She turned the exact shade of non-fat Greek yogurt. Her secret boyfriend, Bradley Miller, who held the title of Vice President of Operations and had been lurking 3 paces behind her with a triumphant smirk, suddenly developed an intense professional interest in the subtle geometric patterns of the boardroom carpet. The Crestview Capital investment team watched the entire interaction in absolute silence, mentally recalculating their financial spreadsheets and reevaluating who actually exercised real authority in this corporate hierarchy. Charles picked up the silver clipboard from Victoria's hand as if it were contaminated with biological waste. He looked at the unauthorized termination document for 2 seconds, then turned back to Diane Prescott and her team with a smooth, flawless executive smile. "We will take a brief 10-minute recess," Charles announced smoothly. "Brandon will resume our technical presentation shortly." Then my father turned his head slowly, locking his steel-gray eyes onto Victoria. "Please step outside into the corridor." It was delivered without anger, without shouting, but with the cold finality of a courtroom verdict. Victoria blinked rapidly, her carefully maintained composure crumbling into visible panic. "But Charles," she stammered, her voice shaking slightly, "I was executing formal human resources restructuring protocols based on operational budget relocations." Charles did not raise his voice by a single decibel. He did not move a muscle in his face. He simply lowered the pitch of his voice by 3 degrees outside. Now, when Victoria hesitated for another 2 seconds, no security alarms were triggered and no dramatic shouting matched the movies. But the sheer gravitational pull of Charles' executive authority filled every corner of the room until the air felt heavy. Everyone present understood precisely what absolute corporate power looked like. Victoria turned on her high heels and shuffled out of the conference hall without another word, her footwear clicking against the hardwood flooring like a dying metronome. Bradley attempted to slip through the doorway right behind her, but Charles extended a single finger in his direction without even turning his head. "Bradley, stay right where you are." Charles took the unauthorized termination paper, tore it down the center twice without looking at it, and handed the pieces to an executive assistant. "Shred this immediately," he instructed softly. Then he looked down at me, his eyes softening into the genuine warm smile of a father. "Take 5 minutes, Brandon. Grab a glass of water, and we will finish demonstrating our core architecture to our partners." I stepped out of the boardroom and walked down the quiet marble hallway toward the West Wing alcove, my long-standing retreat whenever I needed a moment to gather my thoughts. I sat down on the leather armchair and pulled out my smartphone. I had 4 missed Slack calls from Bradley, 3 urgent automated alerts from legal compliance monitoring, and 1 deep breath that I had been holding in my chest for the last 20 minutes. I let it out slowly, watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the tall glass windows. I had never intended to play the family card. Over the past 6 years, I had taken immense pride in the fact that virtually nobody in this 15-story headquarters knew I was the son of Charles Vance. When I first applied for an operational role, I purposely used my mother's maiden name on all application materials and human resources documentation. I wanted to prove to myself and to the industry that I could construct robust enterprise software solutions from the ground up, without relying on executive nepotism or inherited influence. I had built our client onboarding platform from an unstable, duct-taped spreadsheet into the highest margin revenue vertical in the entire corporation. I had spent 50-hour workweeks in basement server rooms, rewritten broken API integrations, and earned the genuine respect of top engineering leads who believed I was simply an exceptionally dedicated 54-year-old operational strategist. But Victoria and Bradley had interpreted my quiet professionalism as vulnerability. They mistakenly assumed that a manager who avoided office politics and focused on clean documentation was an easy obstacle to eliminate, so they could claim sole credit for the $50 million Crestview Capital deal. They had harassed my junior analysts, reallocated my infrastructure budget to fund lavish vendor dinners, and finally attempted a public execution in front of our primary investors. In doing so, Victoria had violated every fundamental principle of executive survival. She had struck at the architect of the very platform she was trying to hijack, oblivious to the fact that I possessed 64 pages of documented evidence detailing her unauthorized financial transactions. My phone chimed with the encrypted text from Charles. "Private elevator is unlocked. Come up to the board suite immediately." The private executive elevator was lined with polished cedarwood and smelled faintly of old leather and executive authority. It bypassed all 15 floors of open-plan offices and delivered me straight to the top-floor board suite. Glass double doors opened onto white marble flooring, leading into a soundproof room labeled Board Consultation Suite. In my 6 years with Vance Global Tech, I had only entered this suite on 3 occasions. Once during initial platform deployment reviews, once when my father underwent emergency gallbladder surgery and needed me to handle confidential voting proxies, and now, when the glass doors slid open, I was no longer merely a senior program lead navigating office politics. I was Brandon Vance, and I was carrying a leather briefcase packed with 64 pages of immutable compliance records. My father was standing by the floor-to-sizzling panoramic window overlooking the metropolitan skyline, a thick red binder labeled Vance Global Enterprise Audit resting on the mahogany table. He turned as I stepped inside and gestured toward the leather chair across from him. "You kept your word for 6 full years, Brandon," Charles said softly, his voice carrying deep paternal pride. "You built that entire onboarding vertical from zero without ever asking for an executive favor or relying on my name, But what occurred in that conference room today was an intolerable assault on organizational integrity. I sat down, opened my briefcase, and laid out the color-coded audit files across the table. I had no desire for a public confrontation either, Dad, I replied calmly. But Victoria and Bradley have been engaging in systemic financial misappropriation for over 2 quarters. They created 3 fraudulent shell vendor entities registered under Bradley Cousin residential address in New Jersey. They submitted invoices totaling $85,000 for employee compliance webinars that were never developed or hosted. And Victoria used her human resources sign-off authority to approve every single disbursement. Charles' eyes narrowed into cold steel as he examined the bank routing numbers, cross-referenced with internal server access logs. When Victoria realized my engineering team was initiating an automated quarterly audit of all operational disbursements, she panicked, I explained. She believed that by staging a public firing in front of Crestview Capital, she could blame the missing budget numbers on my division oversight before anyone investigated her authorization chain. Charles picked up the top financial sheet, reading through the ledger timestamps. This goes far beyond internal policy violations, Brandon, my father observed grimly. This constitutes a severe breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized dissipation of corporate assets, and outright corporate fraud. Precisely, I agreed. And because Victoria used administrative rights to alter engineering project rosters without my written consent, she also violated federal intellectual property governance under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. She attempted to transfer proprietary onboarding source code developed by my engineering team to a fake third-party vendor firm owned by her family members. Charles tapped his fountain pen against the mahogany table. Throughout his 30 years leading Vance Global Tech, he had tolerated creative friction, but he had zero tolerance for executive deception or fraudulent self-dealing. We have an emergency board audit session scheduled for 9 in the morning. Tomorrow, my father stated, his tone firm and decisive. Crestview Capital has formally requested a complete governance review before executing the final contract for the $50 million investment. You will present these audit files directly to the board committee. I repacked the documents securely inside my briefcase. I will have every ledger, timestamp, and server log fully prepared. Leaving the board suite, I took the stairs down to Conference Room 3, where investor partner Diane Prescott had requested a private discussion. The room was small and minimal, containing only a glass table, 2 chairs, and a decorative palm tree. Diane was already seated, scanning financial projections on her tablet. When I walked in, she looked up with a sharp, analytical gaze. "Have a seat, Brandon," she said, her tone crisp and professional. "I have been auditing enterprise technology balance sheets for over 25 years. I know the difference between a routine workplace conflict and an executive cover-up." Victoria Thorne exhibited all the classic signs of extreme panic in that room today. I sat down across from her and placed a sanitized 3-page executive summary on the glass surface. This contains our preliminary findings regarding operations, vendor disbursements, across the second and third quarters, I stated evenly. Deanne picked up the summary and read through the bullet points in silence. After 2 full minutes, she set the paper down and looked at me with genuine professional respect. "You have been quietly tracking this financial leakage while simultaneously delivering a 30% margin increase in client onboarding performance?" "Yes," I replied. "I preferred to let the digital evidence mature until there was zero evidentiary ambiguity for corporate legal counsel." Deanne smiled faintly, leaning back in her chair. Most program managers in your shoes would have reacted with visible anger or caused a scene when Victoria tried to dissolve their role. You stayed entirely composed because you knew you possessed the master ledger. Crestview Capital is not withdrawing from Vance Global Tech, Brandon. In fact, we are officially freezing the initial funding tranche, specifically until your complete audit report is processed by the board. We require absolute governance integrity before our capital enters your corporate treasury. I appreciated her strategic clarity. "You will receive the complete audit binder by noon tomorrow," I assured her. When I returned to my desk on the main operations floor, the atmosphere was dense with unexpressed tension. Computer keys were clicking rapidly, but nobody was focused on their work. Whispers traveled over partition screens like static electricity. Every eye was secretly tracking my movements, wondering how a quiet operational manager had survived a public execution attempt by the HR director. My phone screen lit up with a text from Bradley. "You think you won something today? You just blew up our $50 million funding round. Legal will have your badge deactivated by 8 in the morning." I did not bother typing a response. I took a clean screenshot of the text, attached it to a system alert titled Retaliatory Threat Log, and routed it directly to Chief Legal Counsel. Then I powered down my workstation, packed my briefcase, and walked out into the cool evening air, completely ready for the morning audit tribunal. The first wave of executive retaliation hit our network at 9:17 the following morning in the form of an urgent corporate email broadcast. It originated directly from Bradley Miller Executive Account, Carbon, copied to Finance, Human Resources, Legal Compliance, and Senior Operational Leadership. The subject line read Urgent Administrative Correction. Regarding unauthorized project approvals, the body of the memo was an intricate masterpiece of bureaucratic double-speak. Bradley claimed that due to administrative oversights, during the second and third quarters, certain client onboarding budgets and software integration approvals had been executed without appropriate executive authorization. He declared that all project sign-offs managed under my division over the past 6 months were retroactively suspended and placed under internal governance review. It was a transparent, desperate attempt to rewrite organizational history. Victoria and Bradley were trying to invalidate my digital signature chain across the entire corporate network, hoping to erase 64 pages of audited vendor expenses before the board meeting convened. If they could persuade accounting that my authorization was void ab initio, they planned to reclassify their fraudulent shell payments as routine administrative adjustments. However, they had selected the worst possible timing to execute such a scheme. At 10:42 in the morning, Dana Vance, no relation to our family, simply our veteran head of corporate accounting, called my direct line. Her voice was sharp and gravelly, seasoned by 30 years of navigating corporate maneuvering. "Brandon," Dana said without greeting, "did you see this ridiculous memo Bradley just pushed through the network?" "I am looking at it on my monitor right now, Dana," I answered. She let out a dry, sarcastic chuckle. "They actually believe they can retroactively delete 6 months of accounting entries. Do those two amateurs not realize that your approval signatures are hard-coded into our legacy audit platform? That database is like a digital tattoo. It does not vanish simply because an HR director loses her composure." "Are you honoring their suspension request?" I asked. "Not on your life, honey," Dana stated resolutely. "Accounting just filed an official notice with corporate compliance stating that we will not process any budget reversals or vendor overrides without explicit written authorization signed by the board audit committee. And we seed Chief Legal Counsel twice just to make sure." I thanked Dana for her steadfast support, hung up the desk phone, and unlocked the reinforced lower drawer of my desk. Beneath the false bottom lay the master audit binder, bound in dark leather and secured with red compliance tags. It contained 64 pages of undeniable proof. Every altered engineering roster, every fraudulent expense report, every Slack message where Victoria had ordered junior analysts to bypass standard purchasing thresholds, and every receipt from luxury steakhouses where Bradley had entertained shell consultants. I opened my mail client and drafted a formal cover transmission addressed to the Board Audit Committee and Chief Legal Counsel. Pursuant to corporate governance standards and fiduciary oversight obligations, I wrote, "Please find attached the comprehensive audit review detailing operations vendor disbursements and authorization chains for the second and third quarters. This documentation is submitted proactively to protect corporate assets and maintain organizational integrity under federal legal standards." I attached the encrypted audit file and transmitted the message. Within 15 minutes, the corporate network began to reflect the fallout. Victoria's name was quietly removed from the afternoon investor luncheon schedule. An administrative assistant whispered that the board chairwoman had ordered an immediate freeze on all external communications issued by Human Resources. Shortly thereafter, a senior compliance officer walked into Victoria Corner office and officially informed her that she was required to stand down from all active project representations pending the audit review. Victoria did not accept the order quietly. Through the glass partition of her executive office, I watched her gesturing wildly at a junior legal associate, her voice occasionally echoing through the corridor. "This is a targeted personal attack," she shouted. "He is manipulating internal database files to frame me." The legal associate remained completely impassive. He stood with his arms folded, holding a secure tablet displaying the immutable cloud audit trail that proved every single timestamp in my file was authentic and tamper-proof. By 11:30, Bradley was observed hurrying down the hallway toward the executive elevator, clutching a leather binder of his own. But when he pressed his access badge against the electronic scanner, the indicator light flashed red and emitted a harsh double beep. His executive clearance to the board suite had already been revoked. He stood before the elevator doors with a flushed face, sweating profusely as several junior analysts walked past, pretending not to see his humiliation. I sat quietly at my desk, completing my routine operational reports. I understood that when corporate manipulators realize their authority has crumbled, they do not accept defeat gracefully. They scramble, they invent conspiracy theories, and they attempt to destroy everything around them. But I had spent 6 years constructing an indestructible operational structure. Every line of software code, every budget allocation, and every vendor contract in my department was backed by absolute legal and financial transparency. At 12:15, my desk phone rang again. It was the executive assistant to the board chairwoman. "Brandon, please bring your physical audit binders and report to Boardroom A on the 10th floor immediately. The audit committee is assembled." Boardroom A on the 10th floor was cold, silent, and steeped in the somber atmosphere of a judicial proceeding. Long oak tables, crystal water carafes, and 9 board members seated in high-backed leather chairs. At the head of the conference table sat my father, Charles Vance, his facial expression completely unreadable as he reviewed a printed copy of the master audit file. To his right sat Chief Legal Counsel Patricia Vance again, no relation to our family, and Dana from Corporate Accounting. Positioned across from them were Victoria Thorne and Bradley Miller, both looking like criminal defendants, standing before an unyielding tribunal. Victoria was still attempting to maintain her poised executive posture, but the pronounced tremor in her fingers as she touched her water glass betrayed her overwhelming anxiety. Dana stood up, walked to the projection podium, and initiated the presentation, displaying the audited spreadsheets across the wall monitors. "Let us begin by examining page 14, Dana stated, her voice calm, precise, and clinical. On August 14th, an operational expense entry of $1,274 was submitted under discretionary development for a dinner at Maison Dining Room. The official justification was vendor relationship expansion. Dana tapped her control tablet, displaying the restaurant reservation record alongside corporate banking statements. According to verified records, the dinner party consisted of Victoria Thorne, Bradley Miller, and Erica Lang. Erica Lang was registered the following morning as an external compliance consultant and paid $25,000 from HR reserves. However, corporate background checks confirm that Erica Lang possesses no professional consulting credentials, maintains no corporate business entity, and is, in fact, Victoria's first cousin. A low collective murmur passed through the board members. One senior director shook his head in disgust, leaning back in his chair. Dana flipped to page 29 of the audit file. On July 12th, a senior analyst named Emily was removed from our primary onboarding software project roster without operational cause. Her position was filled by a contract firm, charging double the standard industry rate. The required approval, signature line, for Brandon Vance was completely bypassed. As demonstrated in these authenticated Slack transcripts, Victoria explicitly instructed the junior analyst to route the documentation through Bradley. Promising to adjust the system records after the quarter closed, Patricia, Chief Legal Counsel, stepped forward to address the board. "This represents far more than an internal policy violation," Patricia declared firmly. Bypassing established operational authority to redirect corporate funds to unvetted family members constitutes a severe breach of fiduciary duty and unauthorized dissipation of corporate assets. Furthermore, attempting to reassign proprietary software code developed within Brandon Division violates federal intellectual property standards under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. Bradley suddenly bolted out of his chair, his face turning dark red with rage. "This entire file is a fabricated hit job," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger across the table at me. "Brandon forged these Slack logs. He has been plotting to undermine operational leadership for months. He utilized his private access to Charles to manipulate internal server backups." Patricia did not even blink. "We executed automated cryptographic hash validations on every single file in the audit submission, Bradley," she answered coldly. "The digital signatures match our secure cloud archives perfectly. Unless you are proposing that our entire enterprise server infrastructure was breached, these records are completely authentic, verified, and unalterable." The board chairwoman, a sharp, formidable leader named Eleanor Vance, unrelated to our family, turned her eyes toward Charles. "Charles," Eleanor said with quiet gravity, "the board requires absolute clarity on this matter. Is Brandon Vance your biological son?" Charles looked up from the audit binder, his posture erect and his eyes clear. "Yes," my father answered steadily. "Brandon is my son. 6 years ago, when he joined Vance Global Tech, he chose to work under his mother's maiden name because he refused to accept any executive favoritism. He built our onboarding division from zero into a $40 million operational engine entirely through his own technical talent and dedication. The only reason this corporation did not suffer catastrophic financial loss earlier is because Brandon maintained strict operational integrity while others were siphoning assets from the treasury." Eleanor nodded slowly, looking around the room at her fellow board members. Deep, respectful silence enveloped the boardroom. By 1 o'clock, the board reached its formal determination. Victoria Access badge was deactivated immediately, and she was ordered to remain inside her office while legal prepared formal termination papers for cause. Bradley was placed on immediate administrative suspension, with all corporate access revoked pending federal compliance review. That evening, Charles and I attended a scheduled dinner at a quiet downtown steakhouse with Diane Prescott and the managing partners of Crestview Capital. The atmosphere was refined, elegant, and relaxed. Diane raised her glass toward me across the table. "To Brandon," she said with a warm, genuine smile, "an executive who understands that in high-stakes corporate leadership, disciplined patience and clean documentation will always defeat arrogant posturing." We clinked our glasses together in quiet celebration. Crestview Capital officially released the $50 million investment tranche. Early the next morning, the final resolution took place on Monday morning during an extraordinary executive assembly held in the main corporate auditorium. Every division head, senior manager, engineering lead, and administrative staff member was present. The atmosphere in the auditorium was electric with anticipation, as news of the weekend board decisions had already spread through every corner of the organization. Charles Vance walked onto the stage, standing at the central podium with the calm, commanding presence that had defined his 30-year tenure as Chief Executive Officer. He did not display slide decks or read prepared speeches. He simply looked out at the assembled leadership team and spoke clearly into the microphone. "Over the past week," Charles began, "our firm underwent an exhaustive internal governance audit. We discovered that certain individuals holding senior positions had chosen to prioritize personal greed and arrogant self-interest over their fiduciary duties to this company, our dedicated employees, and our investment partners." He paused, allowing his words to resonate across the silent auditorium. "Effective immediately, Victoria Thorne has been terminated for cause due to gross compliance violations, unauthorized self-dealing, and breach of corporate trust. Bradley Miller has been indefinitely suspended, pending further legal investigation regarding financial irregularities." A quiet wave of relief swept through the rows of staff, followed by immediate, subtle nods of approval from department managers who had endured Victoria's toxic HR leadership for years. Furthermore, Charles continued, to ensure that our operational integrity is never compromised again. The board of directors has voted unanimously to create a new executive governance oversight division. I am proud to announce that Brandon Vance has been appointed as Vice President of Operational Integrity and Systems Architecture. The auditorium erupted into enthusiastic applause. Senior software engineers, accounting staff, and project managers stood up to clap. They had worked alongside me for 6 years, knowing I was the person who stayed late in server rooms to fix technical bugs and protect project budgets, completely indifferent to corporate politics. Later that afternoon, I walked down the main floor corridor toward Victoria's former executive office suite. 2 IT security specialists were busy sanitizing her desktop hard drives, while a corporate compliance officer packed her personal belongings into a standard cardboard box. Victoria was standing near the window wearing her coat, her face pale and devoid of all her former arrogance. As I passed her open door, she looked at me with trembling lips. "You planned this entire trap from the beginning, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice stripped of its previous sharpness. I stopped and looked at her calmly. "I did not plan your choices, Victoria," I answered softly. "You chose to siphon corporate funds, you chose to forge vendor authorizations, and you chose to attempt a public humiliation in front of our primary investors. I simply maintained accurate, clean documentation. In corporate life, as in personal life, your choices write your ultimate outcome." 2 security officers arrived a moment later to escort her from the building. Her executive badge was scanned at the security barrier one final time. The indicator light flashed red, a low rejection tone sounded, and the system monitor displayed access revoked, termination for cause. She walked out through the revolving glass doors into the cold afternoon rain, entirely alone and disgraced. Bradley exited through the basement service door an hour later, carrying a single briefcase, his profile completely purged from the corporate network. By 4:30, I was sitting in my new executive office on the top floor. The room was spacious, quiet, and filled with warm afternoon sunlight. Resting on my desk was the executed $50 million partnership agreement from Crestview Capital, bearing Diane Prescott's signature alongside my own as Vice President of Operational Integrity. My father walked into the office carrying 2 cups of hot black coffee. He placed one on my desk and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. "You delivered exceptional work, Brandon," Charles said, his voice filled with deep paternal pride. "You saved our investment partnership, but more importantly, you preserved the integrity of everything we built." I picked up my coffee cup and walked over to stand beside him at the glass window. "We built this company on truth, technical excellence, and honest work, Dad," I replied. "And that is exactly how we will lead it into the future." We clinked our coffee cups together as the evening sun set behind the skyline, casting a warm golden light across the city. A new era for Vance Global Tech had officially begun, founded on accountability, strength, and absolute integrity.